All right, ChatGPT for business. We're going to be talking about generative AI, prompt engineering, and process automation with ChatGPT. Thanks again for Data Science UA for partnering with us for this webinar. Excited to see the community working and hope to do more events in the future. So let me see the first point, let's say. So you guys probably know some of these things already, but let's start with the motivation. So why do we care about AI? Why do we think that this technology is useful in one way or another? So a couple of things about that. Well, first of all, we can see already a massive technological innovation happening. As you probably have heard already, GPT-4 can pass the law exam in the USA and has reached the human level on many different frameworks and benchmarks. It has many practical applications. I'm pretty sure that many of you have been using ChatGPT or Hugging Chat, Bard, and so on to write emails, to summarize notes, to create outlines for workshops or webinars, and so on. Moreover, it has tremendous value in research, in automation of business processes, in discovery, in terms of scientific discovery or drug discovery, and has tremendous potential to create new knowledge. Another factor why caring about AI and why businesses in particular care about it is that there is a lot of competitive pressure about it. So companies are already implementing ChatGPT pilots and generative AI pilots, and those that are implementing it in production will be much faster and cheaper than the competition. Hence, they will have an edge compared to the other companies on the market. So a lot of companies are rushing to try this out and to see where they can derive value. And the last large factor is extremely high speed of change. Frankly, a lot of analysts say that we are currently in the fastest changing environment ever in the history of humanity, including industrial revolution, including invention of electricity, telephone, and the internet itself. So ChatGPT, for example, was released only 9 months ago. Well, 10 months actually for now, and a lot of change has happened in this very short time. I've heard saying that 2023 has been a very fruitful decade for AI, and this saying comes from March or April this year, and it gives you a little bit of a understanding to see that things that were not possible even a year ago are now commonplace and not surprising anybody really. And development accelerates. Pretty much every week we see new papers, groundbreaking new papers, state-of-the-art models. We see new prompt engineering techniques being invented, new models released, open source, and the like. And the fact of the matter is that for those of you who want to enter the space as a for a personal benefit or as a company, you need to start acting now, because one of the factors in the AI space are accelerating returns or compounding returns. So when you start working on it, you start building quality data sets, for example, they will only improve over time because you can feed back into those data sets and recreate them in terms of what systems like ChatGPT give back to you. You can basically teach them to work on your own company data, and thus you can accelerate processes incrementally, step by step. And let's say after 10 years, you can be very much ahead of the other people in the market. So this is why I care about AI. And I wanted to give you kind of a quick agenda about how we're going to proceed. First of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about myself and tell you a bit of a gist of who is the speaker guy and why you're supposed to listen to me or care about what I have to say. We'll look into the impact of generative AI, broadly speaking, on different industries. We'll have a look into the use cases across a couple of different business functions. And a large chunk of the webinar will be about prompt engineering. I'm going to share several different prompt techniques, the classic ones, and also the ones that we are using at Osnova to work better with customers. Last but not least, we're going to speak about process automation with ChatGPT and say a couple of words about our company, what we do in that space, and which kind of things we built with customers. So let's proceed. So quickly about the speaker guy. So my name is Holovatyi. I'm the co-founder and chief AI officer at Osnova. We are a company that builds digital products with AI. About my journey in the space, it started back in 2014 when I read the book Data Science for Business and finished my econometrics course. That was, let's say, the first push that I went into first time series analysis and then classical machine learning. Then 2016, I founded an AI community. Some of you might have come through this community, Technology Messenger. and organized more than 35 events, participated in what I call the first chatbot craze of 2016 and 17, tested about 2,000 chatbots at the time, and also built a couple of chatbots for the Chip magazine and the Bits and Pretzels conference. In 2017, I started working at Celonis, Germany's fastest growing startup, as a data scientist, building data integration tools and dashboards. In 2020, I founded my first company, Enterprise AI Consulting, and was helping out customers on data strategy, pilot implementations, and use case analysis. 2021 was my first touch point with prompt engineering when I won a hackathon together with the team, an international team of folks that we took the first place in the hackathon. It was also the first time I worked with GPT-3 at the time and got introduced to the whole prompt engineering thing. In 2022, together with my co-founder Boris, we started Osnova, the company that we're currently working on, and built, as I said, digital products with AI. In terms of the output, we did about 20 projects and AI implementation, strategy, and use case analysis, helped build about 6 data teams for customers, conducted a bunch of different workshops on AI and data science for customers like University of Bundeswehr, the German military, Zurich Insurance, Hyper Island, Outweiss, Headfound, and many other customers. Also, today is going to be the 17th speaking engagement that I have on AI in different conferences and webinars. And also we do content marketing, publish articles on the topic of AI regularly. All right, so far so good. If you have more questions, feel free to post them into the chat. And let's go straight into the next slide and talk about the impact of artificial intelligence. So if you see the sources, you'll see McKinsey and Goldman Sachs, Business Insider. Of course, they are not prophets of truth, and some of these numbers might be speculative. Nonetheless, McKinsey projects that AI will create about $4.4 trillion in value per year. This is more than 4% of the global GDP. At the same time, Goldman Sachs projects AI to eliminate 300 million jobs. And just for context, this is about 10% of the global workforce, because don't forget, there are kids, there are elderly people who do not work anymore, there are people who cannot work. So very roughly, we have about 3 billion people out of 8 billion that actually are working. So 300 million is a massive job cut. So the question that arises from this situation, and of course, the numbers can be different. One is clear, this technology is creating value already, and it is eliminating jobs already. So if we extrapolate the trend, we will see that this is likely to continue. So the two questions are, well, who is going to capture that value? Who's going to profit from the generative AI craziness? And on the other hand, who is at risk of losing their competitive edge or their job? So if you look at this from the company perspective, from a perspective of a business, we can look at 3 different levels of corporate hierarchy that are pretty typical, let's say, right? Executives, managers, and employees. And all those groups, they have different perspectives on the question of generative AI, on how to use it and how to profit from it. So executives, CEOs, CFOs, and so on, they are looking for ways to make their company's business model and product portfolio robust against the AI disruption. So they want to avoid a situation that in 5 years, their company will become irrelevant due to artificial intelligence. But their problem is that they don't really know the technology. They don't know the products, the AI first products that it enables, and also what impact on different markets it will have and how the organizations will work. And those are crucial points to actually develop an AI strategy. Second group are the managers, let's say business unit, department leaders. They have very clear tasks in terms of improving performance of their department and improving business processes. At the same time, they lack knowledge about the use cases which are applicable to their processes, which kind of team roles are necessary, which kind of tools and infrastructure is needed to test generative AI quickly, to run pilots basically, and to understand if it has value for their department. In terms of employees, those are the people actually doing the job, operational employees. They want to make their jobs future-proof. They don't want to lose their jobs now. They also want to be hireable in the future, employable in the future, and have a competitive skill set, all right? At the same time, they have a problem that they don't know how the nature of jobs will change, because generally speaking, if you think about a person working in accounting or procurement who is not necessarily very tech savvy and familiar with technology on a very deep level, they may not know and don't have the time to think actually about how AI will transform their jobs and which skills they will need to acquire those. All right, so this is the context that we're thinking through, right? The organization and different levels of organizational viewpoints on the problem. And a lot of what we are going to be discussing today, it touches in some way different groups, more or less. You know, the most part of it would be about the managers and the employees, let's say, because we're not going to talk about the strategy too much, since we're focusing on the use cases and the prompt engineering. Obviously, the job of the executives is also important, but let's say the focus of this webinar will be on the use cases and prompts, just to make it, you know, more applicable to all of you guys, and to help you out try different things with prompt engineering. All right, so the next point are the use cases. So here we have separated, you know, roughly 5 different groups of use cases. They can be applicable for various business functions. And those groups are content creation, research, communication, data analysis, and software development. This is very broad, of course. You could create a different categorization. We just did it for simplicity's sake, essentially. If you think about content creation, about generate presentations, proposals, and marketing posts and white papers, those can be extended, obviously. You can think about generating also invoices if you work in accounting, or answering customer support tickets if you work in customer service, and so on and so forth. So those use cases are very generic, right? You can also generate project and technical documentation, which actually works like charm, special technical documentation. It's relatively easy. You can import your library, let's say, or release notes into ChatGPT or similar tools, and ask it to create pretty much a complete documentation. It does tend to make some mistakes or inconsistencies, but those are usually relatively easy to fix. In terms of research, especially when you use plugins, it's very powerful for doing, for example, company research or lead research if you're working in sales. This is one of the use cases that we at Osnova are implementing on the regular basis. We are researching our customers with ChatGPT. Right now, not that much actually anymore, because they have disabled browsing feature, you know, in July or something like that. It is available in Hugging Chat though, and it is also available through plugins if you really need to try. Also, it helps with communication. You all know about emails and messaging drafts. You can also build complete solutions as a chatbot for customer service. You can build it on top of the external or internal FAQs or knowledge bases, or use it for coaching. Actually, the internal FAQ, so to say, or the enterprise search, LLM-powered, large language model-powered enterprise search is one of the popular use cases. A lot of companies are trying to implement it. It is quite complex at the same time, because if you imagine that you need to connect the whole cloud storage of the company, for example, SharePoint, OneDrive, Confluence, and so on and so forth, it's just a massive amount of information. It also takes a lot of time to integrate, but this is a very powerful use case, because it essentially allows companies to put all of their internal data at the palm of a hand of the employee and have access to all of this. In terms of data analysis, also a very powerful use case. Some of you probably have seen that OpenAI has recently renamed their code interpreter into advanced data analysis. On a side note, I personally think that OpenAI is pretty horrible with naming. I mean, ChatGPT also doesn't really roll off the tongue, but that's a different topic. Data analysis is very powerful, right? A lot of companies still work in Excel, and they upload Excel files to ChatGPT and they run analysis. Microsoft has also recently released Python for Excel. So essentially, this is one of the really big topics. And if you haven't tried data analysis with ChatGPT, I have, let's say, a beginning of a use case in one of the prompt examples later, not the full one because I couldn't share the proprietary data set. But I strongly recommend you to try it, because it can sometimes even answer questions about causality, right? About the reasons for something happening, which such tools are not really supposed to be able to answer, but it is pretty impressive. You can also fix errors in data. You can ask it to fill in those errors or automatically interpret data, generate reports automatically. Most of the BI tools, for example, they have some sort of markup language behind it. It's a JSON or YAML or something like that, or some JavaScript-based language. And essentially, you can also generate complete reports with ChatGPT if you want to. You would need to fine-tune it. For GPT 3.5, fine-tuning has recently become available. And you can also fine-tune open source models. But this is also a very powerful use case. And of course, software development, probably very interesting for many of you, and something that I believe many of you have tried. As data scientists, you can use it for library design or package design, and of course, code generation, completion, and review. And in one of the slides, there's kind of a bonus slide about the new AI first IDE that I wanted to present you. All right, so this is kind of the summary of the practical use cases. And you may say, oh, okay, Dennis, we kind of know most of them or all of them. This is not really interesting. And I would be like, yeah, you're right. This is something that you could see in many presentations. This is just an introduction, let's say, that to describe what comes next. And what comes next, the first example that we have is the GPU server example. And the GPU server example, it's kind of a lengthy chat, which I will show you in a second, which started when I just asked myself a question, how many GPUs do I need to train a large language model, right? How many GPUs would I need to buy if I wanted to just buy them? Because recently I saw that Tesla, created a new GPU cluster. They spent 300 million on it, 10,000 GPUs. And I was like, well, we're not Tesla, we cannot buy 10,000 GPUs, but let's see how many we could maybe buy to train models for our customers. And I ended up with a purchase order for NVIDIA A100 GPUs. It's a pretty hefty purchase order, I have to say. But let me just show you the chat, how the conversation went. This is also an example of the prompt technique, which we call prompt sequences. In a sense, it's simply asking a series of questions to ChatGPT or large language model. The trick is that prompt sequence is kind of a stable sequence of questions that you can replace with other words that you can use variables with. I will also share some libraries to do it. And you could extrapolate this for other types of products. So let's just go through the conversation first, right? I start with give me ranges for the number of GPUs needed to train a large language model. And when you formulate a prompt like that, you essentially trigger the system to generate a large chunk of something. Like you're not asking to summarize it, right? It's a generative or expansion case. And let's have a look. This is GPT-4 model. Let's have a look at what it does. It essentially tells us a couple of important things: the factors affecting the GPU requirements, how many cards do you need? And it gives us what is most important, approximate ranges. Like for small models, you can train it on 1 or 2 GPUs. Medium models, you can train it on 2 to 8 GPUs, and so on and so forth. And then here, state-of-the-art models, hundreds of thousands of GPUs. And I was thinking, well, okay, well, thousands of GPUs may be too many. But let's say if we would go with 10 to 100 GPUs of latest generation, just to see what are the price ranges. And I also specify the potential for volume discounts, which is also an important caveat when you specify this kind of conditional statements. When you say if or when or where, things like that, they work very much like charm. They work similar like they work, let's say, in SQL or something like that. And they constrain the search. They limit the search domain for the model, and usually the responses are much more streamlined and precise. Here we can see some of it. It first comes up with the estimate for the prices of the models. Not all of them are on point, as you know. It also says it here. Cutoff date September 2021, but it gets them close enough so that we can run the calculation. It calculates 10 times 200. 5,000 and comes up with the estimates for the GPUs. If you would buy 10, you would start with 25K. If you would buy 100 high-end GPUs, you would end up with 2 million. It also specifies the volume discounts, which are typical for the industry. and also talks about additional costs. If you're thinking about the total cost of ownership, which other things you need to consider, because of course, if you just buy a bunch of graphic cards, you will not be able to do much. You need servers, cooling, power, networking, potentially software licenses, and maintenance costs that you need to cover. And then I ask a question which is very specific. I'm asking, what GPUs gives the best flops per dollar? Flops is a measure of performance of GPUs or computing devices in general. And it starts explaining what it is: measure of computational power, not the only metric that matters, availability, power consumption. So basically, without asking, it serves as a consultant, right? It consults me on what needs to be considered to have a proper answer to these questions. It considers 3 different series of graphic cards. It calculates the flops per dollar, having estimates of those for each card, as you can see here, 30 flops, 20 flops, and so on. And it then calculates, it uses the code interpreter. Well, it's a very simple code, of course, but it runs code interpreter to calculate the numbers and says that, well, NVIDIA RTX has the best flops per dollar. And in the next prompt, I switch gears a little bit, because this was actually what I was seeking, what I was going for. If I'm buying GPUs, I want to know what GPUs are the best buy for me. So I decided to drop technical language, let's say, and come from a perspective of a procurement manager, which you can see here. I'm asking which GPUs are the best buy from perspective of procurement manager, who has a request from the CTO to scale their compute infrastructure. So this one is, again, a conditional statement, essentially, to specify the search domain and make it easier for the system to answer the question. It talks about budget, use cases, power, vendor relations, and a bunch of things which are all important, the popular choices, and so on and so forth. It basically gives me a consultation on the GPU pricing, which are important, high performance and cost comparison, and so on and so forth. So basically, this is something that a consultant would do for you. Now ChatGPT can do the same. And then to make it actionable, I asked ChatGPT to create a template for a purchase order. So now, let's say I'm a procurement manager, and I'm like, well, okay, it sounds good. I actually want to buy those. And I'm saying, hey, give me 100 GPUs, and also specify this kind of data, which are very typical for standard purchase orders. And again, here I wrote it manually. In a corporate setting, you would insert those things from a template, which your company requires to have in a purchase order. And it creates a purchase order template. It also specifies NVIDIA as a corporation, which I think is pretty funny. It doesn't specify the buyer, but it says, okay, unit price, quantity, 1.5 million is going to be the price. It uses American sales tax, not the European one, because we're buying from the American company. And I'm actually not entirely sure if it's the correct one in terms of accounting, or if we should buy with the 19%, but that's also something we can specify in more detail. Then I say, okay, fill in the variables with fake metadata, because I wanted to have a purchase order that looks like a real one. And says, yes, of course. It names our company Tech Firm Solutions, very creative name, as you see. The rest of the data is unchanged. It also specifies the lead times. My name is Jane Smith, and so on and so forth. And in the last step, which is not going to be available because the code interpreter expired, but I asked it to generate a PDF file containing this information. It generates Python code to import the FPDF library, creates PDF cells, as you can see, with all of this data that we had in textual form. And then it runs it. And I believe I have the file. Yes, I have the file here. Oh, let me just show it to you for a second. It looks pretty ugly, but it works. Here's the file. I didn't change anything in the file itself. It was just the file that I downloaded because I knew the code interpreter will expire. But this is the file that you could send out, right? I mean, it needs the proper template and company colors and so on and so forth. But essentially, this is an example of us automating the procurement process. This is kind of the whole reason to show to show this prompt sequence. And the fun part is that if you imagine that you replace GPUs here in the very beginning, you replace GPUs with laptops or chairs or printed paper, and you train a large language model with equip my employees or supply 100 printers in my company, you can run the rest of the process in a similar way. I mean, you would adopt some of the prompts, for example, right, which are very specific to GPUs, which you can also implement either conditional logic into, or you can ask the system actually to pick the right questions for itself, kind of meta prompting technique. But you can essentially run this prompt sequence to create a new purchase order for yourself every time. And here I supplied most of the data manually, or I asked the system to generate it, but things like names of the company and the pricing, you can import it from third-party sources, of course, and you can use what is called function calling, where ChatGPT runs a function, it calls an API or imports a data set to fill in the blanks and to fill out all those variables. All right, let's jump ahead because we have a couple of more interesting examples to show you. Where we are, okay. Also, the funny thing is that Hugging Face just today, they released their training poster where they give estimates of how many GPUs you will need and how much it's going to cost. You can see the link later in the slides. All right. So now let's keep diving deeper into the topic of prompt engineering. So what is prompt engineering, right? You know, in a good textbooks, you always start with a definition. So the definition that we use at Osnova is that prompt engineering just means being able to make AI do things that you want it to do. Very straightforward, very simple and applied definition. When I asked ChatGPT to give a definition, you see it got a little bit convoluted. That is a practice of designing, optimizing prompts to elicit specific or desired responses from a machine learning model. Right? A lot of people talk about prompt engineering like casting spells, which I don't like too much, but there is some truth about it because, as you've probably seen already yourself, depending on how you phrase the prompt, whether you use goal-oriented language, whether you use instruction-oriented language, whether you use conditionals, it changes a lot how the prompt actually works. And let's have a look into a couple of techniques, right? So the simplest one is zero-shot prompting. Zero-shot prompting is basically Googling with large language models. It's just when you tell AI what you want in one sentence, or a couple of sentences, doesn't matter. It just means that you don't have examples, right? You just write what you want. It's very simple, but it can be very powerful. As you have seen with the GPU example, I just wrote 1.5 lines of text and it gave me probably like 2 pages consultation on how many GPUs you would need to train different kinds of models. Another one that I did with Hugging Chat is what markets are the most affected by AI. And it talks about technology industry, healthcare, education, and other things, which make total and perfect sense. All right. Again, it doesn't go very much into the detail from just one prompt, but if this is all you want to see, if you want to replace a 15-minute Google search, you just need to ask it. Okay, it sounds pretty straightforward. Usually, it's also very helpful to give some specifications, like additional specifications for your prompts. If you want to specify, for example, geography, maybe you want to specify business functions, the more precise you are with your prompt, the better. And the prompt on the right, and also, again, all these prompts are the prompts that I or my team are using. This is not something we made up for the webinar. This is something we just used, and some of them, a selection of the prompts that we use, I'm just showing today. So the prompts on the right, you can create an SQL coach on the fly. This was just a silly prompt. I ran into an error and I couldn't immediately understand why. And the error was that there's a syntax error near one of the tables. Those of you who work with SAP systems will recognize these weird table names. And if we look into the chat, it gives us several solutions. As you see, I just copied the prompt and I say help fix. So my prompt is basically help fix, and that's it. And it talks, probably it's the having clause. It's because of the concatenation. of the two columns, which is honestly speaking weird because it's not the first time I'm concatenating the columns, but I actually don't remember. Maybe in the having clause it just works differently, which would surprise me, but could be the case. And it proposes one solution, just do the count, and proposes another solution with a subquery where you can select here the same thing as a subquery and then select those with the count equals to 1. Pretty neat. It solves my problem. It's exactly what I need. And here, as you can see, I didn't need to tell it, oh, act as an SQL expert and so on and so forth. It tends to perform better and be more robust if you specify the role, which we are also going to go into in a second. But sometimes you can just, write what you want. The more precise you are, the more robust responses you're going to get. So if you are using this in production, I would not suggest you to use zero-shot prompting, because sometimes it gives you a good answer like this one. Sometimes it stops here. Let's say it doesn't give you a subquery, which would be my preferred answer in this regard. So, specifying a role, for example, can be beneficial, but not always necessary. All right, let's go further. The next example is the so-called few-shot prompting. It's when you give AI a couple of examples. And this is the one that I probably use the least, to be honest, but this is something you can find in every prompt engineering guide, so I decided to include it. I didn't actually have my own example for this one, so I copied it from Learning Prompt Engineering, I think. I don't remember exactly the website, but basically it creates, an imaginary situation of a watpu, a small animal that is native to Tanzania, and gives an example sentence where you can write this word. And then it says another made-up word, fardoodle, which means to jump, and asks the system to create another sentence. Frankly, I also have a shared chat for it. It's not really fun, so I'm not going to show you. But frankly, you could do the same thing without the few-shot prompting. So that's kind of the problem that I have with this approach. It takes time for you as a person to write examples. They actually rarely, in my experience, perform better than a well-written zero-shot prompt. Sometimes they are sometimes helpful when you want a structured response, like you have a JSON structure, for example, or XML or whatever, and you want to recreate it. Then yes, in this case, few-shot prompting or one-shot prompting is useful. For everything else, honestly speaking, I don't find it very useful, but just wanted to share. All right, the next one is the really fun one, the chain of thought. This is one of the series of blah, 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 something of thought prompts. There is also tree of thought and the algorithm of thought, which are substantially more advanced and much more difficult to actually implement. And you cannot really implement them manually. You can also only implement them programmatically. But chain of thought is a very powerful and very simple technique. You essentially just say, think step by step at the end of your prompt as a suffix. And that's it, pretty much. I mean, sometimes you need to say calculate step by step to be more precise. Sometimes you need to say think, calculate, and summarize step by step. So you can also modify the verbs, because essentially every verb is kind of a function, right? You wrap a function around your prompt, or at least I think about this like that. If I say calculate step by step, I think of it, it's a modifier. It's a prompt modifier, modifying function that changes the nature of the whole prompt, essentially, right? And what the system starts to do, it starts actually going step by step. And as I've shown you here, thinking through the calculation. And it comes often at a different and more precise conclusion. And here, again, it was also one of the cases that I recently used. I have a lot of audio notes, 20 gigabyte of them, around that. And I just wanted to know how many words would that be. And if we have a look into the shop, wait a second. If we have a look into the shared chat, we will see, oh, one second, this is something weird happening. Cannot click the chat because it's hidden behind the PowerPoint control. Okay, so we have this chat, and the calculation goes on and on. We convert gigabytes to bits. We calculate the duration of audio. We estimate how many words are there. Then the code interpreter runs, right, and gives us how many 1.3 million words, which is a lot. I was also calculating another example because I mean, these are I prepared yesterday just to check it out for the webinar, but I used it, I don't know, like 3 weeks before, and I believe those were, I know, some crazy amount of books that I could create from those audio notes. Of course, a lot of them are just garbage, but just, you know, knowing what knowledge base you're working with is kind of interesting. And this one is also applicable for companies because you can do the same calculation, not on audio notes, but you can say, we have a SharePoint, we have approximately that many folders, they have that much data in those file formats and so on and so forth. So you can calculate what is the data asset of your company behind all of the documents that it has. All right, and this chain of thought, again, you can just use it as a suffix to your prompt. You put it at the end of what you want to know, and it gives you a more precise calculation. The next technique that I wanted to share with you is the one that we started building at Osnova some time ago, and we call it perfect prompt structure. And it contains the following aspects: the role of the chatbot, the purpose of the conversation, tasks and task planning, how the chatbot is supposed to execute those tasks. It contains instructions, tools, outcome, and also usually we specify the first message to guide the conversation. And in this particular case, it was a process mining data analyst. That's the one that I said I cannot share the whole conversation because of the proprietary data, but I can share the prompt that we used. And of course, you can remove process mining and just say data analyst. Process mining is one of the fields that I have been actively working on for the past 6 years. And this was kind of in a customer demo where we used it. So you specify the role of an experienced process mining data analyst. This is probably familiar to a lot of you. This kind of act as or role trick has become pretty popular. What I find very useful is given the purpose or the goal. You can call it in different ways, of course, but it basically specifies for the whole system, you know, where we are moving and gives it a sense of direction. I find it helps a lot with keeping the conversation to one thread, you know, not changing the conversation all the time, which sometimes happens in the conversations with chatbots. Then I give it instructions, what it needs to do. Load excellent to memory, create a data dictionary, look for unique values. Basically, I give it a little bit of a introduction into data analysis, exploratory data analysis. The first conversations, I did a couple of demos with this one. I did without the instructions, and they weren't great. They were okay, but they weren't great. There were more mistakes. Sometimes system forgot that it already has a table in memory. So I find describing the process, which is essentially what we do with instructions, we just describe a process for the system, extremely helpful. And it tends to come back to the points even a while after the conversation has been going on. So the conversation management in ChatGPT is really good. It's really difficult to achieve the same fluidity of conversation and keep things in memory of the chatbot if you're doing it yourself. So this is one of the things that you have to consider. LangChain library provides a solution for it. It's not as good as OpenAI's solution, but it's a good start. You can also do a little bit of task planning, right? It's basically in nature, how do you want the system to execute different tasks or instructions? And in the first message, you ask it to confirm you understood the context. And the conversation ends here because the next step is to upload the dataset, as I mentioned. I would highly encourage you to try this one in particular for any of your data analytics stuff or data science stuff. You can also add some things, right, that it generates a Python package for you, for example, as a goal, not just an answer a number of test questions, but you can say, generate a Python package for me to run the analysis, or generate a set of function, a Python module with functions to run the exploratory data analysis. And depending on the purpose, it will change its behavior. So experiment with this prompt. It's very powerful. And this is the one that kind of makes ChatGPT work as an agent. You probably also heard about autonomous agents and all that cool stuff. Sometimes you can achieve a very similar result with just one prompt. Instead of, like, recently I spent €4 to generate just one article, pretty low quality with an autonomous agent. Sometimes it's just easier to do it yourself with a prompt. And for example, if you're talking about articles, this is the one that I really like, that I posted on LinkedIn about a month ago, and it became one of my most viewed and most liked articles in the recent month. I basically asked it to write a summary about prompt engineering. I first did it for my team at Osnova, just so that we have some kind of documentation, because I didn't want to write it down myself. I specified, of course, the contents or the outline. This is why I call it outline prompting, because you give system the structure and then you let it work. In my experience, almost always it works much better than if you would just say, write a short book about the basics of prompt engineering. It would write something. It would, on the first side, also look okay, but it would lack depth. It would lack the detail, and it would lack the specifics that I wanted to see. For example, this act as hack, in here below, the self-reflection and tree of thought reasoning techniques that I wanted to describe. This kind of outline prompting is extremely powerful and useful for any kinds of long-form content. You can see it here in the chat, which I created yesterday. Beginner's Guide to Prompt Engineering. I also specified to have like more than 100 words, because otherwise it writes a very short form content. But here we can see, right, different chapters: introduction, basics, act as hack, description of tasks and activities, role of ChatGPT, guiding with examples, diffuse prompting, breaking down long prompts. This is also, it's similar to the GPU example from the beginning. When we started at Osnova, when we started doing lead research for our sales, first we created just one large fat prompt that has everything like company data, personal data, markets, products, and so on. And it did generate a result, but the result was very superficial. It was just very basic and not very helpful at the end of the day. A very simple solution was just to break those down topic by topic. First, we asked about company information, then about social media accounts of the company, then about the executives of the company, then about the products, the markets, the competitors. And when you run these prompts incrementally, it just achieves much better results. And the chain of thought, again, this kind of a magic box, very simple and very useful. There's also a paper about it. It improves performance, I think, by some 20% or something like that on different benchmarks. Then we have use cases, and as you see, the article. And as you can see also, I saved a link to the article somewhere later, I believe, should be to my article on LinkedIn. It is available somewhere later, I believe. The article looks very different, right? It looks very different from the one generated now. It's the same in the essence, but it's different in wording. It's different in the paragraphs and so on and so forth. The point is, doesn't really matter. This I consider to be technical documentation that I mentioned, because it's not really a creative article, and this works like charm. And if you want to create 10 pages of information, you can do so. 100 is a bit more difficult. It kind of loses the train of thought, but let's say 10 pages is still pretty okay in terms of quality. You might want to be more detailed with the outlines, so not just to have 2 levels of hierarchy as I have, maybe 3 levels, like chapter, sub-chapter, and sub-sub-chapter. Very powerful technique. So, and these would be like the, let's say, the summary of prompting techniques. And these 3 are the Osnova techniques. I mean, I'm pretty sure somebody's using them or something similar out there. But let's say those are the ones that we first developed internally and started sharing with our customers. The perfect prompt structure, which works similar to autonomous agents. We do a lot of customer demos with those. Let's say we tell a customer, hey, let's build a chatbot, which will have this and that functionality. We write it into the prompt, and we mock how an end solution would look like. Outline prompting that I just mentioned, and the prompt sequences from the GPU example. Prompt sequences are the basis for process automation, which I will talk about in a second. Before I talk about the prompt sequences, a couple of things that we won't cover today, because I'm already talking for too long, as I see on the clock. But I just wanted to present them here so that you have the keywords to search for. First of all, the prompting techniques: tree of thought, algorithm of thought, reflection, self-consistency, and agent dialogue. Those are, in my opinion, the most powerful prompting techniques that give you tremendous possibility, that do work kind of like magic spells, although I said I don't like this comparison, but some of them do. Like with reflection, for example, you can ask the system to, well, reflect on itself. you don't need to specify the problem that you have with what the system generated. It finds the problem itself, all right? And if you do this iteratively, if you do a couple of runs of this reflection approach, which is, again, very simple, you just tell it, hey, there's something wrong with your answer, check it or validate it or something like that, along those lines. Formulation has to be different. It's not as simple as with the chain of thought, but very powerful. Agent dialogue, you cannot really do it in the chat. You need to program it with LangChain, for example. They have an example on their chat, on their site, in their documents. You create one chatbot that has, one perspective on a certain, let's say, political or social issue or technical issue, and another agent with a different perspective, and you let them talk, and it kind of brings you closer to the truth, because agents don't really care, but they can discuss and come to some interesting conclusions. The second part are the tools. Prompt Layer, Honey Hive, Vellum, and Promptitude are the four most mature tools on the market. You can test prompts with them. You can build prompt sequences with them. You can do branching with them. They have a little bit of a different functionality. So check out them all. Depending what you need in your project, you might want to try different ones. And the libraries, LMQL, Guidance by Microsoft, and Outlines, and all of them are open source. Those are essentially templating libraries for prompting. If we come back again to this GPU example, if we replace GPU with a variable and call it product, and then we install the LMQL or guidance library, those are Python libraries, and we use certain syntax for Python functions, we can, at runtime, we can replace those variables with different kinds of products that we import, let's say, from our e-commerce store or whatever. Very powerful. They extend the capabilities of prompt engineering to a large degree. They replace a lot of programming. And again, they give you a lot of flexibility, because again, those are still language models where you don't have to always be very precise to get a good result. The bonus slide now that I promised is the cursor. Cursor is the AI first, oh my God, this should be IDE, integrated development environment based on VS Code. It is AI first in the sense that the chat window is always there. It always has your code as part of the context window. And you can also dynamically scrape and create databases out of documentation. In this particular case, you see I scraped LangChain documentation, and I didn't do it. Cursor did it. What I needed to do, I just submitted a link to the documentation. I clicked OK and waited for 5 minutes. I didn't write a scraper. I didn't import anything. I didn't create any database. It just works. And I think it's absolutely amazing. I haven't seen this in any other IDE. It substantially reduces time that I need to read documentation and write code. It's extremely powerful. In my opinion, it's even better than just generating code, because when you use this, the code is actually correct, right? It doesn't really hallucinate some fake code when it uses documentation directly. Very powerful thing. Check it out. And the last couple of things is about process automation with Gen AI. Again, here we come from the perspective of managing information flows in an organization, and how we see documents that are being exchanged, like purchase orders, as atomic units, atomic elements of information. Right? Basically, companies, they send back and forth different documents to each other, and the sending and working on those documents, they constitute a business process. And if we look at that process in detail, we can deconstruct it. We can deconstruct a job of an accountant into smaller pieces and see how they can be automated. And this is what we look at this slide. This is a typical example of an accounts payable process. This is something we developed for a customer of ours, about managing supplier invoices in a shared mailbox. And as you can see, it has very standard steps. Invoice comes in, accountant checks the invoice, purchase order is matched, date is entered, and invoice is paid. And then in the individual tasks, what we see are different activities that invoice box, which is like a code name for the solution, does. It can process the email, extract information, download the file and store it, extract invoice data from it, create a ticket. In some of those functions, you can say, well, you could do this with a workflow automation or with robotic process automation, which would be true, which might be done in this case also by those tools. The difference is that with language models, you can now make decisions. You can, for example, in the second step, you can see here, you can pull in company guidelines about how an invoice should look like, and you can compare them. Instead of a human doing this, you can make a system do this. You can also extract the data from the source system, ERP, Oracle Fusion, it was in this case, and you can match the data from the invoice to the purchase order to see if it actually makes sense, if it was working. So, and if you look at this process, you can see that every step or almost every step can be represented in terms of a prompt, right? If you see process email text here in the very beginning, the prompt would be, hey, take this raw text and extract email, send their signature, and return it back in this JSON format, which would be a one-shot prompt. And the system will return it in this format, which you can then send to the next step. For example, you can call a function on this JSON that you have extracted and do something with that data. And essentially, at every step, there is some little data transformation happening or pulling of the data, comparison of the data happening, which can be described by what we call prompt sequence. Again, coming back to the GPU example, this is exactly the same thing, just a longer one, and also with different branches. Of course, you need to have some conditional logic to consider different examples. What happens if the purchase order is not matched, right? It's going to be a different route compared to when it is matched. But the thinking about the process as a sequence of prompts is a very powerful way to understand how to automate processes in the business with ChatGPT. In the last technical slide, let's say, is the architecture and tools. Here we only wrote down generic tools, of course, not the customer's tools, but this is, let's say, a generic architecture for such a solution. A lot of architectural patterns are emerging right now. I was recently at an event where one speaker from Google was saying that, well, they cannot really give a lot of guidance on architecture patterns to their customers yet, which is kind of true and kind of you can already. And this is what you see on the slide is one of the patterns that is slowly becoming a classic for language model projects, like especially, you know, having some kind of engine runner for the prompt execution, having an API to the AI agent, having a vector database here down to the right, and a document database is still typical, and a vector database is something that is specific to AI agents, which allows you to retrieve contextual data and make the quality of the responses better. So this is, let's say, an example of a solution. I'm not going to go into every detail because there's a lot of detail here. You can look at this after the webinar on the slides, and also feel free to get in touch with me or my team to discuss more. And also a couple of last words about our company, what we do. Again, we build products with AI. We try to support on the entire digital journey. So if you think about the process, for example, is just a solution, we help customers also to come to that solution, right? We help with ideation and the development of the concept, which is especially relevant to this very new field because most companies don't know what to do. So if you are feeling that you don't know what to do, that's pretty normal. Don't get afraid. Again, you can give us a shout, and we can discuss what we can do together. We offer a range of services. The ones that we described, they fall into the center. Those are basically pilot projects, but we also have several workshops. This webinar is essentially a part of our ChatGPT for Business workshop that we give to customers. We also build scalable products together, develop AI strategy, and if needed, we help our customers develop a team. And on this last slide, just a couple of ideas or the workshop ideas that we are running, referring back to the very first slide that I was giving on the different hierarchical roles and how to think about artificial intelligence implementations in the company. We also have these learning formats for different roles for managers, operational employees, and the executives. And with that, I would conclude. I would say, let's go. I would highly encourage everybody, if you haven't tried these tools, try them. If you haven't subscribed to ChatGPT, I'm not a promoter in the sense that I don't get a share, but I would highly encourage you to subscribe to Code Interpreter because it's an extremely powerful tool. I would highly encourage you to try Hugging Chat because it's currently the most powerful open source alternative, which is sometimes even better than ChatGPT. And of course, if you want to talk about AI, if you want to run projects, if you want to learn more, get in touch, subscribe to our LinkedIn page, and yeah, stay healthy. Have fun, guys, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you very
Dennis,
much.
Holovatyi has stopped screen share.
Yeah, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Dennis. So if anyone have some questions, you can ask right now. You can unmute yourself or you can ask in chat.
Maybe I ask in dialogue. So what do you think about LLMs, large language models? Are they fine now? I have heard they are kind of have problems.
Mm-hmm. Well, depending on which problems you're referring to, one problem that people talk about a lot are hallucinations when they make up things. There are a couple of things about that one. Are you referring to hallucinations or something else?
I just have heard that they had a huge expectations which they didn't perform.
Well, in terms of performance, one thing that I have shown on the architecture slide is that you have to have a knowledge base connected to it. When you have a knowledge base, they perform much better. They just understand the context better. You feed them the pieces of context, for example, your company guidelines or your company documentation. So then it doesn't have to invent things. It just basically rearranges and talks about other things. So that's one part. Another part about quality is fine-tuning, which since like about a week, is now available for GPT 3.5. And fine-tuning means that you give it examples of your own data that you want the model to get better at, and it does get better at it. And actually, currently you need sometimes a very small number of examples, a couple of hundred examples only, and you can already train the model and be much better in terms of quality. If you talk about hallucinations on its own, right, when you just talk in the chat, when you don't have company data, you don't have all that stuff, you just talk the way that I just show you in the examples. Well, first of all, you can, the chain of thought reasoning reduces hallucinations a lot. And second thing, hallucinations, in my opinion, are not necessarily bad because they are an example of creativity of the model, right? Also, when people make things up that don't exist, sometimes those things are stupid or don't make sense, but sometimes those things are genius. So don't disregard that fact, I would say. Sometimes what model generates just doesn't make sense, but sometimes it helps you to open a different perspective. So on one hand, you can reduce them and you can improve quality by a lot. On the other hand, you can use them to your benefit.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the answer. So here are some questions in chat. So we can start from the first. Are you an AI automation agency? Here is a question. Yes.
No, we don't position ourselves as an AI automation agency because it is quite limiting. We do work on automation use cases. I mean, broadly speaking, you can say that most of the stuff that AI does is automation. We position ourselves as a product company that builds stuff with AI, or company that builds digital products with AI. And some of them are in the automation space.
Okay, thanks. The next question, can you suggest two ChatGPT generative AI AP open source alternatives?
Two alternatives. I can suggest you like 1,000 alternatives. The very simple source for them is Hugging Face website. On Hugging Face, you have literally thousands upon thousands of open source models. Most of them are built on kind of a small subset of models open sourced by Mosaic or Facebook or Meta, whatever. So they are based on those models, let's say, but those models on Hugging Face are often fine-tuned for specific purposes. If you want to try it out, I would suggest you starting with Hugging Chat. They have Llama 2 model, which is currently the best performing open source model. And it also has a chat interface. It has conversation management, so you don't have to worry about working with APIs. You don't have to worry about GPU memory and all that stuff. This is the place where I would start. Another good place where you could use is the LM Studio, which is a tool which you can install on your Windows and Mac, I believe. I don't remember. I don't think Linux version is available. But Linux Studio is just an app where you can download models also from Hugging Face, but they have like an interface for you to store models, to chat with the models, and so on and so forth, which is also very easy to use. If you want the names of the models, Wizard LM, for example, is a group of people. It's a team that built a bunch of models, Wizard LM, blah, 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 something, 10 billion, 30 billion parameter models. But I would say start with Hugging Face and Hugging Chat and go from there.
Thanks for the answer. So the next question, could you please share all the tools you have listed in your slides, please? Yes, we will. I think that we will share your presentation as well. Yes, Denise? Or
yeah, sure. I mean, I inserted all of those links. I haven't shown you all of the links yet because I noticed at some point that I'm slow. But yeah, you will have the presentation and all of the links will be available, all the names of the tools. Yeah, for sure.
And also we will share with you a record of this workshop for those who joined us later. So the next question, what is better in the long run for automation companies' processes using OpenAI API or rolling out open source LLM?
Yeah, that's a very good that's a very good question, actually. That's a very operational question, because at some point you will need to decide, right? And both solutions have advantages and disadvantages, right? The OpenAI advantage is just very easy. The API is there. It's currently the best. Well, GPT-4, in any case, is the best language model on the market. So it's easy to start and it's the best quality. It's a big advantage. Disadvantage is, of course, the price. It actually gets expensive pretty quickly when you roll it out. If you don't like work on the demo on your local machine, but actually when you want to roll it out to users, that gets expensive pretty quickly. Plus, a lot of people are very worried about where their data is going. OpenAI has recently released OpenAI Enterprise, which we haven't tried yet because it's pretty much impossible to get access. But it should be an enterprise solution which has your data in a separate cloud instance and so on and so forth. So if you're using Microsoft Azure, let's say, you could use that one. And Microsoft also has OpenAI service offering, which also has a separated data. And if you fine-tune the model, it's going to be only available to you. So there is a solution to that one, but there is not really a solution for the cost factor. So it's going to be much cheaper to buy a bunch of GPUs, to set up a server and to run Llama 2 on the server in the long run. It's going to be just much, much cheaper, especially if you think about a year in the future, 2 years in the future. Currently, the code Llama has 34 billion parameters. And in terms of coding in Python, it's pretty much as good as GPT-4. Think about this and be like, well, okay, in 2 years, probably a model with 7 billion parameters, which is how many times? 200 times? Almost 200 times smaller than GPT-4, will probably be at the same level. The question is, why pay more? So my answer to summarize this whole thing is to prototype, and in the short run, I would use API. I would use OpenAI API because it's very simple. In the long run, for productive solutions, at least look into the open source. Yeah.
Thank you for the answer. So the last question is complying with GDPR requirements when using ChatGPT. Any suggestion?
Yeah. So up until recently, before ChatGPT or enterprise version was released, there was not really a clear answer if OpenAI complies with GDPR. So Sam Altman, the CEO, he was like, oh yeah, everything's all right, but I don't think they even had it in their terms of service. With the enterprise version, they are certified and so on and so forth. So technically speaking, there shouldn't be a problem. Your data privacy expert in the company should be fine with that. Again, if you're using any cloud provider already, if you're using Salesforce in the cloud or Zendesk or whatever, it's not going to be worse than that. At the same time, a lot of people have a little bit of a different perception of it, because you can send any kind of data into ChatGPT, not only tickets, but pretty much your whole company data, right? So it becomes much more sensitive, much faster, because somebody can send confidential information, which should never live on premises. So my suggestion is talk to your data science or data security, data privacy expert in the company. Show them what OpenAI currently has, and what Microsoft currently has, and what Google currently has, and take an assessment with them. It's very difficult to have like a generic answer, because every company has different sensitivity to it. A lot of companies are just scared about GDPR. They don't really have a risk of a fine. They're just scared that they're going to have it. So it's a case-by-case scenario.
Thank you for the answer. So guys, maybe some of you still have some questions, because I think, can answer for several more. So you can unmute yourself or ask in chat.
I have one question, maybe two
Sure.
questions. What about limitation of ChatGPT? First example is request per second. Like it looks like we can send one request per second, and if we do more, it will be error and some retrying of this request. How we can work with this, and what if we need what if we need to send requests in async way, and how we need to manage this?
All right. So the first part about the number of requests, to be honest, I don't remember the number of requests per second or per minute from the top of my mind. Those weren't many, that's for sure. So a couple of things. Well, first of all, GPT 3.5 and GPT-4, I think the number of requests is different by 100 times or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. That's one part of it. So maybe you want to use a less capable model if you don't need the GPT-4. For example, it allows many more requests. For really large-scale solutions, it's still not going to be enough. So there is no good answer for that, because if you need to process millions of requests, it's just not going to work. On the other hand, currently, not just due to number of requests, but also due to latency, it's just slow, right? It just takes 10 seconds, 30 seconds to generate the whole response, or sometimes even longer. A lot of use cases are not really feasible, right? You cannot do, let's say, you cannot really use it for fraud detection use cases or anomaly detection use cases. You cannot really use it for streaming data. So a lot of use cases are not applicable to language models at all currently. I believe in the future this will change a lot. Currently, you have to manage, well, on one hand, models that are simpler if you're using an API, which have more requests. On the other hand, you have to pick the use case which is feasible as of September 2023. That's one thing. And another thing, well, you can run your own model. As I mentioned before, you can either buy a bunch of GPUs, or Hugging Face has released this new server today that you can train your models on. You can run an open source model and put it on as many GPUs as you want, so that you can serve more requests. But still, to be honest, models are gigantic and they are slow by nature. Currently, inference is slow, predictions are slow. So I would consider the use cases that you want to build for now, at least.
Thank you for the answer.
Thanks a lot. So